up.
Oh, then. Okay. Ehud, the left-hand judge. All right? And we'll start by looking at Judges chapter 2 to introduce this because Ehud is one of the judges. Okay, let's read this together in unison. Joshua, son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110.
And they
buried him in the land of his inheritance at Timnath in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. All right? And you see here, this is the conquest of the land of Israel under Joshua. And you see this kind of first a southern campaign, which starts with the conquest of Jericho, and then a northern campaign. Let's continue. After that whole generation had gathered the ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord or what he had done for Israel. Now, why would these people forget? Well, prior to that, they had spent the 40 years in the wilderness under Moses. And during that time, they were very, very unified. Where did the people spend the evening, every evening, when they were in the wilderness? Where did they spend the evening? Where did they live? Houses?
Tents.
They were in tents. And you remember how the tents were organized?
Laid out around the tabernacle.
Yeah, you had the 10, 12 organized in a certain way. And what was at the center, Gary?
The tabernacle.
The tabernacle. How long would they stay at a particular location with their tents?
Until the cloud of God moved on.
Yes. And in the daytime it was a cloud, and at night it was a
Fire.
pillar of fire. And when the pillar of fire stopped, when the cloud stopped, it would go then in. They'd set up the tent, the tabernacle would go in. And the people would stay. What did the people live off? Manna and
Quail.
And where did they get their water? Where did they get their water?
Moses struck the rock.
And of course, according to the rabbis, which is something St. Paul picks up on in 1 Corinthians, was it a different rock every time? No, according to the rabbis, the rock actually moved. He was always hitting the same rock. Because Paul tells us that rock is symbolic of whom? Christ Jesus. It's a symbol of Christ. All right? But their whole society, their whole life, everything revolves around God and that whole thing. But then they go into the promised land. What happens? It says, let's read together. The Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord and served the Baals. They forsook the Lord, the God of their ancestors, who had brought them out of Egypt. They followed and worshipped various gods and peoples around them. They aroused the Lord's anger because they forsook him and served Baal and the Ashtoreths. Why would they serve the Baals, the Ashtoreths, Moloch, all these gods? Well, they had spent 40 years in the wilderness, depending on what I said. And before that, how would they live? For 400 years in Egypt.
Slavery.
Slaves. And they're slaves in Egypt. How do you how do you make your living? How do you exist in a place like Egypt? What job do they mainly have? All right, they're farmers, all right? And when you farm in Egypt, what is it based on? The Nile River. You don't have to have a single drop of rain to fall on you. But what happens every spring in the Nile?
It floods.
It floods. And that not only brings water, what does it also do?
Nutrients.
Nutrients. And you can live off that. You can, in fact, you look at satellite images even today of Egypt, and you have abject desert for most of the country. And then there's this green ribbon, the Nile River, where it's just lush and green. And still one of the big producers foodstuffs in the area. In fact, if you lived at the time of Jesus and you lived in Rome and you baked your bread, where was that flour from? Probably Egypt. Egypt. And you never had to worry about drought because it depends on the Nile. It means all the snow that hits the mountains in Ethiopia where Quebec is. But you now are going into Palestine.
Say that again. Where is it again?
The Nile.
Yeah,
starts
where?
in Egypt, in Ethiopia for one thing. Ethiopia,
Really?
Kenya. Well, there's two Niles. The Blue Nile to the east starts in Ethiopia. The White Nile starts at Lake Victoria on the border of Kenya and Ghana.
Okay.
And they come together at Khartoum in Sudan. But both those areas they originally come from get fed by rain and snow from the mountains of Central Africa. But now they're in Palestine. Farming is different in Palestine because what don't you have in Palestine that you had in Egypt? The Nile River. All right? There's no Nile River. So if you're going to farm in Palestine, what does it depend on? It's not going to depend on a river and irrigation. Because there are all these rivers in Palestine, but they are seasonal. They rainy season, they'll fill up, and then they dry out. The only exception is the Jordan River. But there's a problem with the Jordan River. You're not going to farm along the Jordan River. Why? The Jordan River is in this cavern way down, and not far from the river, it goes way up. I mean, to take that water down to the Jordan and put it on a flat ground, it's just impossible. And so, even though you've got water all the time in the Jordan, it's really too hard to farm. So, if you're going to farm in Palestine, what does it depend on? It doesn't depend on a river. What is it going to have to depend on? Rain. Does that rain always come? No, you have droughts. So, the agriculture is based on rain. Now, if it's based on a river, what can you do about it to help it? What can you do? And they did this in modern-day Iraq, Mesopotamia, that's where Babylon and Assyria all are. And you have Egypt. What can you do about river water as a person to help your farmer? You can irrigate, you can build things, you can do things. But when you're dependent on rain, is there anything you can do? Not much. You just have to hope it rains. So their whole religion is based on agriculture. The whole point of their religion, for the most part, is to get rain to come from the gods. The primary sky god is Baal. And their agricultural practices of the people that lived there for centuries were combined with their religion. There's so much of it together and put together that way. When the European settlers came to North America, were there some things they learned from the Native Americans about farming? You're a European and you're going to grow crops. What are your crops? What are you going to grow? What's your main crop? What? You're a European and you're doing farming in Europe. What's your main crop? Wheat. What don't you have? You don't have tomatoes, you don't have potatoes, you don't have corn. Why not? Those are all New World varieties. The Native Americans didn't have any wheat, but what did they have? They had the famous three sisters. They grew together. Corn, squash, and beans. And the corn plant would be used, what, as the stake for the beans and the squash would grow around it. And you remember the story of the Pilgrims when they came? How did they learn to farm in Massachusetts to help survive? Remember the Native Americans, Squantum came to help them? You remember the story of what would they put in the ground with the corn?
Oh, a fish or
A fish. They learned all these farming practices from the Native Americans. And in learning that, because that was best for the New World. But what did they not take into account that was so much a part of the Native Americans doing farming? The Native Americans just didn't have farming practice, they had religious practices involved. One of the biggest things is you have all these Native American farms. What would you never see near any of those crops? Would you never see around any crops? A man. All the farming was done by women. Why? Because they spiritually believed that man was the killing force and the wife, the woman, was the life-giving force. So if you're a man there, the woman is going to say, oh, good, you can help me. She's going to chase you away. Get out of there. You're going to ruin the crops. And that's their paganism that was inculcated with their farming practice. And that's the way it was with the Palestinians. Of course, because of their understanding of Christianity and so forth, the European settlers didn't get caught up in that. But they did learn the things that the Native Americans did to help them exist. But these Israelites, when they go into the Promised Land, they don't make that distinction. They pick up the farming practices from the local people, but they also pick up all their pagan religion. And why would you be attracted to that in a culture where you have to depend on it? If you're a worshiper of the true God, what can you do about the situation when every year you're dependent upon rain and you're not sure whether you're going to get it? It's like the Iowa farmer who invests and has to go into debt so he can buy the seed and hope that his harvest covers it. Now, in the case of Iowa, that means you might go into debt, but in their case, you might starve. So, as a worshiper of the true God, what could you do about it? Pray to God. Trust God. Period. You couldn't do anything. You had to depend totally and completely on God. But if you're a pagan worshiper, what could you convince yourself that you could do? Well, they do more than pray. What are some of the other things they would do?
Go to the Ashtoreth pole or something, right?
Yeah. Go ahead, somebody else.
Sacrifice.
Sacrifice. What was the sacrifice?
Their kids.
Kids, virgins, all kinds of ceremonies, all kinds of rituals, at least to convince yourself that you can do something about it. This is so much a part of our culture, that we're taught not to trust in God, but to do something about it. You get on the internet and you find the information on how you can do this, this, or that, whatever.
Today we depend on the government.
Yeah, there's some of that. Some of that happens, whatever. But back then, that was the temptation, and that's why they would forsake God.
And apparently, occasionally, quite by accident, it must have worked to hook the what would have been a non-believer.
Yes, yeah, you could convince people that they were. Yep, yep. And here you see the rainfall in the land of Palestine, and it's a little misleading because it's given in millimeters, not inches. And the places that are kind of like green, where you have a lot of it, well, they say they have 500 millimeters. I don't know if you know what that means. That means about 50 centimeters, which means less than 20 inches. That's the rainiest part. And you got a lot of parts where there's nothing. It's very dry compared to here. Here you can farm successfully and hold it on. But you go to the American West, you look at satellite images of all the farms out west, what shape are they? Circles, because you know that there's a sprinkler system with the well right there and it goes around the circle because it's dependent on irrigation. Okay, let's continue reading Judges. In God's anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them in the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist. Whenever Israel went out to fight, the hand of the Lord was against them to defeat them, just as he had sworn to them. They were in great distress. Okay. This is what you see happening in the Judges. And it shouldn't surprise us because this is what God had told them through Moses before they entered in the promised land. Let's read here from Deuteronomy 32. Take this book of the law and place it beside the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God. There will remain as a witness against you. For I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you've been rebellious against the Lord while I am still alive and with you, how much more will you rebel after I die? Assemble before me all of the elders of your tribes and all your officials, so that I can speak these words in your hearing and call the heavens and the earth to testify against them. For I know that after my death, you are sure to become utterly corrupt and turn from the way I have abandoned you. In the days to come, disaster will fall on you, because you will do evil in the sight of the Lord and arouse his anger by what your hands have made. So what does Moses say? What happened is exactly what he predicted, what God predicted would happen. How why would God allow this to happen? If he knows they're going to, why let them into the promised land? All right? Romans 11 gets some insight from Paul. Let's read this. Again, I ask, did they stumble so as to fall beyond your recovery? Not at all. Rather, because of their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make Israel envious. But if their transgression means riches for the world, and their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their full inclusion bring? So we hear from Paul, St. Paul gives us the overall picture of what's really happening. God calls Israel out of slavery in Egypt. He calls them into the promised land, knowing full well that they will not be faithful. Why? Paul tells us why. So that through this, he can reveal himself to the Gentiles. Because if Israel doesn't fall, who's the salvation going to be for? Them alone. And people are going to end up thinking, well, it's because they're good people. But through the fall of Israel, God is showing, it's for all people. Because Israel couldn't make it, nobody else could. Instead, it has to be through God's grace. And of course, Paul is speaking to the Gentile Christians, and what is he saying their attitude should be towards Jews? Forget you? You rejected God? No! He says here, if their loss means riches for the Gentiles, how much greater riches will their full inclusion bring? So what is he sharing with us Gentiles Christians that we need to reach out and show Jewish brothers and sisters so that they can gain full salvation, not through their genetics, not through their works, not through being good, but through faith in Christ Jesus. Okay, now we see this pattern that takes place in the book of Judges. And I've got the circle there, and that's what you see happening again and again in Judges. Let's read this together. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hands of these raiders. Judges is a poor translation. Wait, this is what I'm doing. It's a poor translation. Don't think judge, think charismatic leader or savior. Let's continue. Yet they would not listen to their judges, but prostituted themselves to other gods and worshipped them. They quickly turned from the ways of their ancestors who had been obedient to the Lord's commands. Why does he use the word prostitute? Well, we see the imagery used throughout the Old Testament of equating idolatry with adultery. God presents himself as the husband, his people is the bride, just like we see that in the New Testament. Christ is the groom and the bride. And by going to other gods, it's like adultery. And that's one of the reasons why actual adultery is so rejected by God, because it symbolizes, connected to this attitude of being idolatrous. All right, let's continue. Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge save them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them. But when the judge died, the people returned to ways even more corrupt than those of their ancestors, following other gods and serving and worshiping them. They refused to give up their evil practices and stubborn ways. Therefore the Lord was very angry with Israel and said, because this nation has violated the covenant that I ordained for their ancestors and has not listened to me, I will no longer drive out before them any of the nations Joshua left when he died. I will use them to test Israel and see whether they will heed the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did. The Lord had allowed those nations to remain. He did not drive them out at once by giving them into the hands of Joshua. Here's that cycle. You see, people have a judge, they've been saved by God, but then when the judge dies, they fall away. God allows other nations to persecute them, they call out to God for help, and God saves them by sending a judge, and they're fine until the judge dies. And you see, God is a part of this. He's trying to show all this to show that the people aren't able to keep it, that something else has to come, namely the judge, Christ Jesus. And another thing you see is how God uses those other nations to accomplish his purposes. The order that God had given to the people under Joshua was to conquer the whole nation and expel all the pagan worship. But the people failed to do that. God knew they would. He let it happen because he's now going to use them as his means of punishing the people of Israel.
They had to get so low before they'd call on God again.
Right. All right, with that understanding, we'll look at the story of Ehud. Before I get to Ehud, though, any other judges that you can think of? Who are some of the other judges?
Samson.
Samson.
Deborah.
Pardon? Deborah. Yeah, she is one. Who else? Gideon. Those are the big ones, you know. The final one is kind of different because he's not the kind of military leader that we see with the others, and that's Samuel. But the others like Jephthah, who just know a little bit about. But we're going to look at Ehud. Let's start reading here from Judges 3. Again, the Israelites did evil in the eyes of the Lord, and because they did this evil, the Lord gave Eglon, king of Moab, power over Israel. What is Moab? Where you see the location of Moab, it's the southern part of the nation of Jordan. Later on, it was to gain notoriety as part of the kingdom along with Edom in the period before Jesus lived. At this point, it's Moabite. Who's probably the most famous Moabite in the Bible?
Ruth?
Right, Ruth. Let's continue. Moab means in Hebrew, he is my father. And that's a reference to Genesis 19 because who are they related to? They're related to the family of Abraham. Why? Because they are the grandchildren of Terah, the father of Abraham. Remember, Abraham has a nephew named Lot. All right? And there are two daughters of Lot, Moab and Ben-Ami. They're the ones that start the nations of Moab and Ammon. Okay? Let's read here, continue. Getting the Ammonites and Amalekites to join them, Eglon came and attacked Israel,
And they took possession of the city of palms.
City of Palms is a reference to Jericho. Now, in our minds, we might picture all the land as Palestine as being filled with palm trees. But the actuality is that if you look at a geographical mountain of Palestine, you see a lot of it in the center is dominated by hills and mountains. And what you have with Jericho, Jericho's located just north of the Dead Sea. You have the Dead Sea, the lowest point on earth, goes way down. It's below sea level. It's 1,000 feet below sea level. Therefore, it's very warm. That's where you're going to find your palm trees. Whereas up in the hills, the western or Jerusalem, you're not going to find That's kind of the significance of Palm Sunday. What were they doing with palms on Palm Sunday?
Kind of carpeting the road ahead of
Yeah.
Jesus.
And what does it say that they're using palms? Palms didn't come from Jerusalem. Where'd they come from? Probably Jericho. What I'm saying here is this was lavish, what they did on Palm Sunday. They were just kind of going around cutting some branches off the trees. These were special palms that had been imported for the Passover celebration. So one way to contrast it is to go to places like in the United States, like here, this is a lake around Phoenix area. You see palm trees all over the place there. If you go just 100 miles north, you got Flagstaff, you won't see any palm trees, you'll see pine trees. Why? Well, Phoenix is 1,000 feet above sea level. Flagstaff is 7,000. And you have that difference, say, between Jerusalem and Jericho. So that's why they were noted as a city of palms. Okay, let's continue. The Israelites were subject to the kingdom of Moab for 18 years. Again, the Israelites cried out to the Lord,
and he
gave them a deliverer, Ehud, a left-handed man, the son of Benjamin. The Israelites sent him with a tribute to Eglon, king of Moab. Now, any other thing we know about Moab besides that's where Ruth came from? You remember last week? What happened last week? Who we talked about? Balaam. Right. And what was Balaam about? What was he hired to do?
He was supposed to curse the Israelites.
And when did this take place? Was this the same time as this or before this? This is under Moses. This is while they're still traveling through the wilderness. It's before the judges. All right? And who is once Balaam to curse the Israelites? Balak, king of what? Moab. Even though they're related to the Israelites, they don't like them. In fact, they refuse them entrance through their land in their journeys. All right, so there's tension right from there between the Moabites and the Israelites. Right? And this king, Eglon, is powerful enough that he's taken over and he demands tribute of the people. And so God raises up a judge, Ehud. Who's left?
You're a lefty. I was going to ask, what's the significance of mentioning that?
Yes, we'll find out.
Okay.
There is a very, very practical significance to it. Okay? First of all, you have the symbolism. What's the understanding? In Latin, the word for left, as in left-handed, is sinistra. What English word do we get from that?
Sinister?
Yes! Because what was the old perception of left-handedness? Evil. Shady.
Well, we always think of Jesus at God's right hand.
Yes, exactly. You don't want to be at the left hand, you want to be at the right hand. All right, the left hand. And in cultures, what do you do with your left hand? What do you do with your left hand? Keep your right hand free and clean, good. And when we shake hands, how do we shake hands? Right hand. And what do you do with your left hand?
Wipe
You
yourself.
hold
Wipe yourself, exactly. Exactly. You weren't going to use your left hand that way. So that was kind of the understanding. And why would the right hand be the good and the left hand either? Just a basic biological reason.
Well, you usually hold the sword in your right hand,
And why?
because you have the shield in your left hand.
Well, why do you have the shield in your left hand? Because you have the sword in your right hand. Why do you have the sword in your right hand? Well, Don Bice, pitchers. Vast majority of pitchers are what? Pitchers? Come on. They are fast baseball players. The vast majority are quarterbacks. The vast majority are right-handed. Why? Because that's the way it is with the vast majority of the population. All right? So, of course, you're going to make the minority is the sinister one. All right. Read. Now, he had made a double-edged sword about a cubit long, which
He
is
strapped to his right thigh with his cloak.
how long is a cubit?
18 inches.
21.
From here to here.
18 inches.
Yeah.
21 and a half.
So it's rather long side, short. It else's, it's double-edged. It may not seem like much to us, but he's left-handed. Don, who's this?
Don Drysdale.
No, come on.
Sandy Koufax.
Sandy
Koufax.
The greatest, for
Yeah.
sure I could say left-handed pitcher of all time, if not the greatest pitcher of all time. Left-handed. What helped Koufax as a left-hander?
He was a Jew.
Yeah, he was Jewish. We know that because he didn't ever play on Yom Kippur or Rosh Hashanah. He was Jewish. But what advantage did he sometimes have as a left-hander? Well, most people were used to having right-handers pitch them, and when a left-hander pitched, they weren't as used to it. They would have a certain advantage. Gentleman Jim Corbett, years ago, heavyweight champion of the world. And one of the things that made him awesome was he was left-handed. So what did he lead with? As you see, he led with his right. And people weren't used to that. Used to have somebody who would lead with his left hand. That can make it very tricky to face him. All right? So right-handed and left-handedness have certain advantages. Also the sword. You talked about a double-edged sword. Not all swords are double-edged. You can also have the curved sword. If you use the sword at the bottom, the curved sword, what is your use of it? How do you use that sword? You swing it.
Swing versus stab.
Whereas the single-edged sword would be for
Stabbing.
Why does Ehud have a stabbing sword rather than a curved sword? Because his intent is to stab, and we'll see why. Okay? He presented the tribute to King Ehud, who was a very fat man. Was there tribute? That's what he going to do. He had ravaged the land and said, I'll keep ravaging it unless you pay regular tribute. All right? Let's find you remember the famous movie, The Magnificent Seven? The Mexican raiders would come in, ravage the village, take what they wanted, and leave. That's kind of what Egon was doing. Okay, let's continue. After he had presented the tribute,
He sat on their way, and those who had carried it. But
on reaching the stone images, there you go. He himself went back to England and said, Your Majesty, I have a secret message for you. The king said to his attendants, leave us. And they all left. You see, Ehud's kind of setting things up so that he's alone with this king. Next. Then he approached him while he was alone in the upper room of his house and said, I have a message for God for you. As the king rose from his seat, Ehud reached with his left hand, drew the sword from his right thigh, and plunged it into the king's belly. What's the significance of the left hand?
Well, there again, he probably didn't think, even when he was making that move, that he was reaching for anything because
When
it was his
you
left hand.
give a message or a tribute to a king, you always did it with which hand?
Oh,
The left hand. Why? Because what would the king suspect if you're reaching in with
Right.
the right hand?
right.
That's
Sword.
But he's doing it with his left hand, so the king doesn't suspect in any way that there's a weapon. Because it's over here on his right thigh, right? So he sees this as, well, he's really giving me a message. If he'd done it this way, the king might be suspicious. So he was giving it by the left hand, the king doesn't realize until it's too late, and instead of having to take a big swing, it's plunge, just like that. So he's able to assassinate the king without causing a commotion. Okay? The handle sank in after the blade, and its bowels discharged. He did not pull the sword out, and the fat closed in over it. Then Ehud went out the porch. He shut the doors of the upper room behind him and locked them. After he had gone, the servants came and found the doors of the upper room locked. They said, he must be relieving himself from the inner room of the palace. They waited to the point of embarrassment, but when they did not open the doors of the room, they took a key and unlocked them. There they saw their Lord fallen to the floor. I love the King James, the old version, instead of point of embarrassment, it said, till they were utterly at a loss.
Oh.
Because what have they noticed? Well, what's happened as a result of the deadly war? These bowels have come out. What do they think? They think he's going to the bathroom. But after a while they said, oh, this is really bad. And that's when they investigate. But how does all this enable Ehud to escape?
Gives him time.
Yeah, and they don't suspect anything. The fact that the king's silent and the fact that the smell is coming out, they're thinking he's going to the bathroom. And they know that something can take time. And that gives Ehud plenty of time to escape. This shows us, especially in the Old Testament, how the Bible is so earthy. And why is it that way?
It's realistic of real life.
Yes. And the understanding from the Old Testament is important, is to understand that the earth, the physical, is real, it's good, it's God's blessing. God intended for that being the way. There's a tendency later in the Greek world to say that the physical is wrong and you have to get this higher level and so forth. You don't have that at all in the Old Testament. Okay, let's continue. While they waited, Ehud got away. He passed by the stone images and escaped to Sarah. When he arrived there, he blew a trumpet in the hill country of Ephraim, and the Israelites went down with him from the hills, with him leading them. Follow me, order, for the Lord has given Moab, your enemy, into your hands. So they followed down and took possession of the borders of the Jordan that led to Moab, and they allowed no one to cross over. At that time, they struck down about 10,000 Moabites, all vigorous and strong. Not one escaped. That day Moab was made subject to Israel, and the land had peace for 80 years. Now, how did the assassination of Eglon help Israel? What did the United States do not too long ago to Venezuela? Took out their leader. And was there a long fight after that? No. Sometimes you can be that way successfully. You chop off the head, the rest follows. And you see that, especially in the ancient world, where you have this great power under individuals. Who is this individual?
Caesar.
Julius Caesar, right. What happens after he dies? Rome goes through a long period of civil war because he had become so strong that it took all kinds of wars to establish who would take his place. Who is this? Henry VIII. What was Henry VIII's problem?
Wives,
Yeah, and why was it such a problem?
no sons.
He had no sons. And why was that a problem for the leaders in England?
No heirs.
No succession.
No succession, and why were they concerned about that?
They didn't know what to do.
Who had ruled before Henry VIII? Who ruled England before him? His father, Henry VII. Who ruled before Henry VII? There was a whole period of wars called the War of the Roses, which Henry VII won, and it was just awful. And so for the leaders in England, including the top leader, Cardinal Wolsey, who's a Catholic cardinal, he's doing anything in his power to make that marriage happen. He wants the king to have a son because they want succession, they want peace. If you didn't have that, that leaves England in a wreck. Who's this person? His German name is Friedrich der Grosse. Frederick the Great of Prussia. He's the one that makes Prussia important in the 1700s, and that leads to the establishment of Prussia as, of course, a unified Germany. In the French and Indian Wars, as we know here, you had a war going on in Europe. And at that point, he is allied with England against Russia, Austria, and France. And he was a great military leader. In fact, later on, 100 years later, when Napoleon's forces come and they defeat the Prussians, and all the generals go to where Frederick's grave is, and they're standing by the grave. Napoleon comes in last and tells them, "Gentlemen, remove your hats. If we were still alive, we would not be here." That's how respected he was. He is able to defeat the French and the Austrians, but his forces are down. They have no soldiers left. They are exposed to the Russians. And he said, why? Because the Tsarina, the Queen of Russia, has been fighting. She suddenly dies, and her son takes over as Tsar, and he likes Frederick, and he makes peace with him. That's how getting rid of the head can really change things. Who's this gentleman?
Hirohito?
No,
Mao Zedong.
no. Here, read this closely. Yamamoto. He is the man who planned the Pearl Harbor attack, head of the Japanese fleet. What happened to him? In 1943, Navy intelligence discovered that he was flying to a base. And so they arranged to have Army fighter planes shoot down his plane, basically assassinate him. He was killed. Because why did they do that? They thought, we take away the head, and we're going to demoralize the Japanese. So you see all these historical examples of how you knock off the head, the rest happens. A more interesting one that I've read too is that when the Spanish came over, they conquered Mexico, they conquered the Incas in South America, and they do it amazingly quickly. And the reason why both the Aztecs in Mexico and the Inca in South America were really firm, and the top was the one who reigned. And all they had to do was get rid of the head figure, and the rest would fall, and it did. But when the Spanish came to North America, you didn't have that head and you just had all these individual tribes. And so that it wasn't the same thing in trying to conquer them, because they were all separate tribes. You might stop somebody here, but then there's another one. And so because of the nature of this, Eglon's that kind of powerful ruler, you get rid of him and they fall. Okay? Now again, what was the problem with a judge like Ehud though? 80 years, things are great, but what's the problem? They died. And you have that problem that the English are worried about with Henry VIII. We need someone to succeed. We need this to happen after them. Well, who is our judge? Who is our judge?
Jesus.
Yeah, Genesis 3, he will crush your head. And what's the difference about Jesus as judge and the judge is sent to rescue the people of Israel?
He lives forever.
It is forever. It's eternal with him. And that's what God's setting up all along. All this history is to set that up. But none of those things are going to work. The solution is the one that God had planned all along, his son, Christ Jesus. Any final comments? I think next week is, what's it next week?
Absalom.
Absalom, that's right.
The long flowing hair.
Flowing hair, yeah. All right? So the son of David. Okay, let's close with prayer. Dear God, we thank you for judges like Ehud who you sent to rescue people. We thank you for most of all for the ultimate judge, your son Christ Jesus, who didn't just come and then die and leave, but who reigns eternally, so that we can trust always in him. We thank you for this. Okay, thank you very much.
Interesting, thank you.